the thing that was so freeing for me was realizing that, and how I could forgive myself too, is realizing that so much of that behavior that I did, there were consequences, and there should be. But I did it because of the pain I was in. I did it as a result of, survival mechanism that I was in coming from my childhood abuse. It doesn't excuse what I did and why, how I did it and the effects that it had on people. And that's some of the cleanup I've had to do over the years. But I can now go, okay, I did that because of this.
I think you're one of the people in my life that I talk to the most. So it's
That
so
what you thought was?
that I talk to the most.
I know.
So
So true.
it felt natural for me to invite you as one of my first guests coming back to podcasting myself, and also as I was listening back to our conversation that we had, which, by the way, anybody listening, episode 21. I there's like many. I had actually idea of what I wanted to talk about. Now I have some more ideas on what we could discuss on top of if we gonna get enough time. But before we start, I want to ask a question that I'm probably gonna ask everybody: is what is something that at some point felt impossible for you that now feels normal, or just another thing?
Being in love,
Whoa, tell me
being
about it.
loved. Yeah.
So what was the journey? That's a big jump. That's a strong impossible.
It went from me having a belief system that I started back when I was probably around 11 of not believing that I was loved to spending years hunting down people that would love me to realizing that the biggest thing for me and the reason why, well, one, there was a belief, right? There was a belief that I actually believed it, that nobody loved me because it was told to me. But the other was um, learning to love myself, learning to, like, I completely skipped over that completely. Like, and over time, I realized that not only did I not love myself, but I was also abusing myself.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
That's how
so
I was taught to take care of me.
question here would be how did you realize it that you didn't love yourself?
um,
You even abuse yourself.
well, the abusing kind of came before the not loving myself. And it was things like realizing, like I was telling the story before we started recording about my hair, right? So, uh, one of the things my mom did was cut my hair real short. My hair used to be really long and it was heavy, and so it was straight. And when it got cut off, it just frizzed, and I didn't know how to manage it. So I literally fought with my hair for years. And I remember as a teenager, of course, teenagers care very much about their hair, of getting frustrated with it. And I would have this resin brush, and I would literally smack myself in the head. That was kind of the first realization that I was like, whoa, I don't know anybody that does that. I've
What
never
what
witnessed
about
that.
it in that situation made you like what what was different, or what made you, or maybe there was something that helped you to actually notice that you were doing that instead of being in that autopilot of doing it?
I don't know exactly, except maybe I really hurt myself one time,
Mm.
because as I was doing it, I didn't think about that. I was so frustrated. All I was in, I was, you hear about like blackout rage. It wasn't quite like that, but it was certainly my focus was, I was so frustrated. And I was taught that is something that my mother used to do. She'd get frustrated with my hair, and she wouldn't hit me as hard as I hit myself, but there was a lot of complaining the whole time she was brushing my hair, and a lot of hair pulling, and then she would smack me with a brush sometimes when she get real frustrated. So that was a learned thing. So that was kind of the first sign of, okay, wait, like, I have other friends that I've never heard them get so frustrated with their hair. I've never seen them hit themselves with a brush.
So how do you go from that to reaching that impossible of being in love and feeling loved?
It's a long process. It was a really long process. It was many years of, the other thing is hearing the abuser's voice in my head, recognizing that and hearing the thoughts that, start paying attention to the thoughts that were going through my mind. And it was just constantly barraging me with negative and belittling and abusive, so there was that. And, not having a good marriage, not having a healthy marriage, not having really healthy relationships. I started looking at that and I was realizing I was kind of the common denominator on all this, you know?
Ouch.
Yeah, ouch is right. It wasn't, I'm not bashing anybody that was in my life, because during that time too, so many of these people did have an influence in my life and certainly at times helped me in my life. It was just, I outgrew them is a lot what happened in that arena. But, and I can even remember towards the end of my first marriage of feeling like that whole romance thing between a man and a woman is just bullshit. Like I really thought it was just bullshit. It was just in the movies, and when I'd see it in real life, it was just people putting on a show. Because I had never experienced that, and so it was so far from my belief system, and it fit right in with that whole belief system of not loving me and nobody's going to love me. And then it was after that that I began to get pay closer attention to my thoughts, pay closer attention to how I'm treating myself because there was no self care and I needed to start doing that. And that's when I started. And I used to walk around and say, "Oh, we need to be our own best friend." But I was starting to implement that in my life, but I was far from being my own best friend. And it was probably 2016 that I really was kind of the game changer for me. And that's when I realized I had no idea who I was. I didn't know what my identity was. I didn't know what my standards, my values, or my identity. And my now husband, I was dating him then, said, "Well, let's go on a journey and let's find Lisa. Let's find her. Let's figure out who she is." And so I've been on that journey. And in that relationship with him, and just he's kind of like one of my first safe places, is where I realized, oh gosh, I really feel loved. I really love him. And there is that romantic kind of love that I thought was so phony.
Yeah. How would you describe love?
Oh, it's that's a good question. I have to think about that a minute. It for me it feels it kind of feels whole within me. It feels like I feel whole, if that makes sense. Um it I know what it feels like not to be loved. So that's interesting. I have to kind of go to the opposite of that. And what does it feel like? It feels like I have importance, I have value, even though I have that without
Yeah.
love. I have that, but it just kind of amplifies it. That's what I
Mm.
guess I could say. It amplifies it. It amplifies all the good things. It's also very challenging because when you're in love, boy, you want to talk about getting triggered. That's where
Mm.
a lot of your triggers are going to happen is
Oh, yeah.
in love, whether it's a friendship or, a partner. It gets amplified. It's work.
Uh, Question I had also, it probably is slightly similar to how you describe love, but like what was the differences in perception of love that you had back then and now?
Well, back then I obviously didn't understand it because I didn't feel like I ever had it. I know my parents loved me. I know they definitely loved me. But to have a healthy love, I didn't have that experience.
How would you then describe love?
Well, it wasn't a healthy way, but just being valued, being heard, being listened to, being cared about, and it just it's not just getting attention, but it's like hearing me, like
Like
actually,
being seen?
yeah, being seen. Because I was definitely the generation still that, you can be seen but not heard.
Mm.
That was very common in my generation growing up. So yeah, being heard, and not dismissed so much, because it seemed like there was a lot of that. And but that, that's also from a perspective of a child.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah,
Interesting. So that is very impossible. It's so interesting to hear like what is
I know.
impossible for like each person. What's the first thing that comes in mind? Because there probably are like several things. So maybe you can give us a little glimpse of what do you do? Like what's your background and what is it that you specialize in? And maybe give us a bit insight also on your podcast.
Yeah. So I am a childhood abuse survivor, and thriver, and I've spent many years working on my healing journey. And as I've shared on my podcast, most of the, I guess most of my healing has happened over like the last 10, 15 years. And so much of that is because we've learned so much about trauma, and most importantly, healing from trauma. And in all that, for so many years, there wasn't the help that there is now. And so I had to kind of fumble through life and try to figure out modalities. And I always thought, gosh, that's a lot of years of suffering. And I hate that I had to suffer like that for so long before I actually got some relief from the trauma and all that. And there's got to be a better way to get that out there so that people suffering can get help. And so for 8 years, I helped co-facilitate a childhood abuse healing workshop for women, and help women begin their journey of healing, or maybe go a little deeper into their healing. And that was huge and profound. Um, and then I wanted to have a voice. Now, like I said, in 2016, one of the things I got was my voice. That was where I discovered my voice. And I wanted to be able to have more of a voice because I feel like I have a lot to share, but also create a platform for others to have a voice as well. Bring on experts. And so that I created the podcast, which is the Healing and Growing Hand in Hand podcast. And that's what we do. And it has 4 pillars. One is to give a place for people to have a story. Two is to bring on experts that give us, resources and tips and tricks on how to manage our trauma. And then the third is to bring awareness to areas of trauma that we may not, be aware of or not have a lot of information on. And then the fourth is going to be prevention, preventing childhood abuse, and trauma. Try to eliminate as much trauma. Some trauma you can't avoid, but so that's what I created that for. And to take it another step further, um, I now have created a women's childhood abuse healing workshop, which I'm very excited about. It's an 8-week workshop that helps women, on their healing journey. Mostly, it really kind of focuses on the people who haven't really begun their healing journey, or have begun their healing journey and they want to go deeper. And so, that's been now my passion, is really getting resources out there for people, because the one thing that trauma, excuse me, and childhood abuse does is it shuts down people's voices, and it's shut down by shame. And shame oftentimes causes us not to talk about what's happened in our life for up to 4 or 5 decades. There's survivors out there that have never shared it. And that's not okay. And it's not okay that we carry the shame that was put upon us, right? The abusers are the ones that should be carrying that shame. So that's kind of who I am, and my passion and what I do and how I want to help others.
One thing that I admire about you, and it's probably one of the reasons why I'm back at podcasting myself, is kind of witnessing and seeing your sense of mission that you have, or that dedication towards the both the podcast and the workshop. Where do you think that is coming from? Because big part of it also is that once you have that energy and drive behind you, then that's what a lot of times can push you into doing and achieving. And it also in some ways feels, it's a lot of work, but it feels less kind of, not as much as an effort, or like it's you have to force
Yeah,
yourself to do it. So like where
yeah.
does that sense of like mission or drive come from?
The only thing I can think of is just the idea that if I can help somebody else shorten their pain, if I can help someone not have to carry that. And so, and witnessing people begin their healing journey and have those aha moments and start stepping into their healing, there is nothing better, I swear. Like, you can't pay me enough money to get that feeling of watching someone finally break free of some of the bullshit that's been in their life from the trauma that they experienced. And so that's what really motivates me. I know I've had it in my life. I had them so often in secret, though. I
Mm.
had them, you know, because I didn't have the support system that I needed. And so I did a lot of this kind of on my own or in therapy, when I got into my biggest difference, I had a lot of therapy over the years, but the therapy that really helped me the most was the trauma therapist, that really help with dealing with the trauma itself.
So what's the difference? How do you know if it's trauma therapist, or what are some of things to keep in mind, and why that was better for you than other modalities?
So talk therapy has its place, absolutely. But with trauma, there's two elements of trauma that happen. One is the belief system that we have and stuff that gets stored in our subconscious. And then the second is the trauma also gets physically stored in our body. So our bodies react. And oftentimes what a trigger does is it starts the thoughts, but it also activates the body. And so in your trigger, you're reliving that moment. So now I lost my place of what the question was. See, I get on
Uh,
these tangents.
well, now I forgot again. We're back in that place. 2 years later, still.
Oh god, yeah, it still happens. Oh god, too
Okay.
funny.
Okay, it might come back, but as you were talking, the next question I had was because you mentioned triggers.
Yeah,
Maybe before triggers, can you talk on like what is healing? What is it?
you know, healing to me for me was being able to manage my trauma rather than it controlling me. That's what healing is, and it's a lifelong journey. I will be healing until I take my last breath, but it definitely gets easier. And with each step of healing that I've had in my life, I've had, more freedom, more, my life is much more full. So, yeah, that's what I would say healing is. And for me,
And you mentioned that managing your trauma it gets easier. What are some of the signs that you have noticed that kind of give a signal that it is getting easier, or what are some of the things that have become easier for you?
I think the biggest is the triggers,
Okay.
is recognizing when I'm triggered. And, because when I wasn't aware of being triggered, and I'm sure I was triggered a lot because back in the day, not only that, I was in survival mode. So I was already hyper vigilant about everything and always on alert anyway. And then I would get triggered and just I would go over the top. And so being able to manage those triggers, because those triggers not only are super hard on me, it's hard on everybody that's around. It's hard to witness, it's hard to be a part of it. There's collateral damage that happens usually as a result of it because it's triggering is not a good thing. And so that's a big thing for me is managing that. And now I'm to the point where I can catch when I'm triggered and I'm able to not even react to it. Doesn't mean that I still don't feel it in me. Doesn't mean that I still don't um, have the kind of the racing thoughts that happen, but I'm aware of it and it keeps me from, I'm like, oh, I'm triggered. So I need to keep my mouth shut for a minute. I realize that. And so that's what I mean by managing it easier. First it was, recognizing that I get triggered and going and cleaning up the messes. And then, trying to catch them before I'm triggered and not always doing it and being successful to the point now where I still get triggered, but I'm much more aware of it. And, the difference for me is I just, it, when you get triggered, it's over the top. It's over the top. It doesn't match what's going on, if that makes sense. Like my thoughts go racing and my body reacts, I get shaky or whatever.
Yeah, it's like you lose control in some ways, or that
Yeah.
trigger, or maybe that automatic body response or subconscious response kind of comes out and it takes the steering wheel.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good way to put it.
But I'm thinking even like with how would you describe what a trigger is? What does it feel like? What does it look like? Kind of to go to really basics with this.
Well, a trigger is you're actually reliving a memory. You're actually reliving it. Your body is reacting as though you're back in time and you're reliving that moment. So that's one of the things for me that I notice is I go from being calm to like over the top. And in that over the top includes racing thoughts where I can't even grasp what's going on. Just they're coming at me so hard. And then my body is reacting. So it could be my chest gets tight usually, my breathing gets more shallow, I get sweaty hands. And so that's how I feel a trigger. Um, and so when I recognize that, I literally have to take a step back and sometimes physically take a step back away from the situation and know, okay, you're being triggered. First thing I do is I get my breathing calmed down because that's usually the thing that your breathing is what's going to tell your body everything's okay. You're breathing by controlling your breathing, you're telling your brain it's okay, it's okay. We don't have to run. We're not having to run. We're fine. We're okay. And that also helps slow down the racing thoughts. And and then I can recognize that I'm being triggered and then take it from there.
I was I was thinking this before recording. I was curious to ask you, like, what do you think is the purpose of triggers?
Well, it's clearly our body out of balance trying to tell us there's danger, because um, so I can talk about my Idaho trigger because that one's kind of interesting. So when I was in Idaho and nobody in the family did anything wrong, I want to start off by saying that this is 100% me being triggered. And I knew what my trigger was, and it makes sense. So I had been bitten by a cat, and I knew when I got bit, and I got bit bad, that I needed to go to urgent care. But it was early in the morning, and we were going to do a few things, and I thought, okay, I'll just go in the afternoon. So I was with my family, and one family member uh, had said, "Oh, well, my dad got bit. He gets bit all the time by the cat, and he doesn't have to go to urgent care." Okay, I got instantly triggered right there. Does it make sense for me? Why would I be triggered? Would you be triggered if someone said that to you?
Some years ago, probably.
Yeah. So
Now,
I was
probably not.
instantly triggered, and I felt it, and I realized that the bad things wanted to come out of my mouth, and so I shut my mouth because it wasn't appropriate,
Okay,
and
what made you to shut your mouth instead of saying them?
because
What
I didn't.
helped you?
What helped me is I don't want to hurt people. I don't want to, I
So
don't
in
want
that
to.
moment, you were able to recognize that if I say it, there will be consequences.
Oh yeah, there'll be
So
cleanup.
so you were and like I think it's valuable to pause here because that's a good feedback of where you can get. It's not that you got there day one, but you're
No.
able to, and that's how I also kind of perceive triggers is that trigger is information to me where I think if there's no triggers, there's no growth. Because each trigger is like an opportunity of something like a gift that I
Right.
unwrap, and I'm like, oh, there's like a new thing for me to work
Correct.
on. It doesn't feel good, but it's like an information.
It is.
And what happens in that moment to what you're describing is that you get something happening that triggers you, or there's that like response that naturally you would want to, and like
Mhm.
your usual response is anger.
Yes.
For me,
Lash
it
out.
probably would be like shutting down or like just, I don't know,
Oh.
sadness or kind of withdraw. Um,
Mhm.
because I
Interesting.
was like, oh, I can't make any conflict. I'm a peacemaker kind of thing. That was my
Right.
identity.
Oh, okay. Right.
So I wouldn't confront. I would kind of take a step back and then try to resolve maybe. Um, but that's still both of them are natural kind of reactions.
Right.
And then what you're able to do and what I'm now able to do because of the practice, consistency and
Yes.
practice, not always, but now, is we're able to take a step back in that moment and you internally feel that you're being triggered.
Hmm.
You don't make it mean anything other than, oh, I'm triggered. I wonder,
Correct.
and
Right.
then you identify the automatic response, and instead of actually acting on it, you are able to think ahead and think about,
Mhm.
okay, if I say this, what will happen, and do I like that outcome or scenario? If not, I probably won't do that. So there's so many things that happen in that millisecond That's why it
So
takes
much has happened.
practice. That's why it takes practice. It doesn't happen overnight, but every
Right.
time you get better at it, where now when it happened, now you can tell what continued, what
Well, and I
happened
was just going to
further.
say, like the initial thought when that was said, my initial response was, okay, fine. You know what? I'll show you. I'm not even going to bother going to the doctor. How about that? We'll let my
Yeah.
hand fall off. Like it really went that crazy.
Yeah.
And again, nobody did anything wrong.
Yeah.
What she said was not wrong. It wasn't. It was I was being triggered. And so I shut my mouth and she kind of kept saying a couple things, but I think my son who was driving looked and he's just like he could see that I think he saw I was triggered. I don't think he realized I was triggered.
Mm.
And he's just like, oh, hey, she just needs to go to the doctor. And so it stopped, right? So we go do our thing. We did lunch or whatever. And then Larry and I, my husband and I, were going to go and probably go to urgent care after that. So we're in the car and I'm in a safe place, right?
Mhm.
I'm with my husband. I'm in a safe place and I'm letting that trigger fire up again. And it did. It fired up because all he said was, are we going to go to urgent care? No, no, we're not. And so just this crazy thought started. It goes from like calm to like crazy land. And and so I just started, and he's driving, right? And I set up and I looked towards him and I'm just like, no, I'm not going. And I'm just saying, I don't even remember what I said. It was
Yeah.
crazy stuff, right? And he just starts smiling. He just started
Yeah.
smiling. And I said, well, clearly I'm being triggered. And the crazy talk that is coming out makes no sense.
Yeah.
And instead of self-sabotaging myself, which is what I was trying to do, we're going to urgent care. And so we went to urgent care. But what was interesting about that whole entire trigger is that was the first time that I literally felt like an out of body experience. And I was
Mm.
literally hovering above watching this whole thing. And I was completely aware of every step of the
Yeah.
way and how critical it was and important that I keep my mouth shut because I can have a really sharp tongue. And I have tapered it over the years and I've learned how to get my messages a lot across without being, sharp like I used to be. Um, but it was so empowering to go through that and be aware as I'm going through it. And because now it's empowering and now I'm really, I don't know, I can't say I know exactly how aware I am of my triggers, but I know I don't get triggered obviously as much as I used to, but I feel like I am really aware of when I am triggered and am able to manage it.
What you said about that hovering over experience, that's exactly how I experience or describe awareness. I'm
Yeah,
literally
yeah,
looking at
yeah.
myself from the side.
Yes.
And
You're an observer.
yeah,
Yeah.
and it it's weird to explain it, but also like in the moment, it's so helpful. And it's something that I think, and that's an interesting piece for me, that I'm now in that observation space so much that it's like a habit. It's like a normal thing. And that's why I think it's easy to, or much easier to catch the triggers. And I'm so aware of them. I instantly know how it feels, where in my body I feel it, what triggered me. Or if I don't know and I randomly feel trigger, I will go within and I will try to understand it. And sometimes I'll be like, oh, maybe it's not the trigger, just something is coming out, like some emotions or something that might have been suppressed.
Yeah.
But a lot of it is that, and this is something that I think that we talked about in last episode that we did on this podcast, was about judgment versus curiosity.
Yes, I was just going to say that. I was going to say, I think the key to this is that instead of being judgmental, because it would be real easy. I mean, think about if we took that scenario and I wasn't aware and the damage I could have done, I could have hurt a lot of people in that, right? And so then the judgment and but instead going into it with curiosity, that's exactly what I was going to say.
And another thing that I wrote down that I think it's important to point out about triggers is that, and not, I probably didn't want to hear it or know it 3 years ago. Triggers are about you, not others.
Correct. 100%. That's why I started before I started the story. I said nobody did anything wrong in
Yep,
this situation at
exactly.
all. It was 100% me being triggered by something. She had no idea, no
Yep.
clue. Oh, and I didn't even tell you what caused the trigger, what I realized
Yeah.
root of it was when I was young and I would hurt myself, my mom wouldn't take me to the doctor.
Mm,
And there was more than once where I was like really hurt pretty bad, and she wouldn't take me, and my dad would end up getting mad and taking me. So it was, oh, you don't believe I'm hurt. And
mm.
it took me getting into an extreme situation before where they finally took me to the doctor. So when she said that, oh, my dad goes to the doctor, my dad gets bit all the time by a cat and never goes to the doctor. Do you see the
Yeah, you
correlation?
jumped right back.
I
Yeah,
was right back to that little girl who got hurt, and you're telling me that I'm fine. Okay, fine. I won't go. Do you see the core? But I did get to the root, which is
yeah.
important. When you get to the root of that trigger, all of a sudden that trigger has no more part in your life.
Okay, so this is interesting. So in this situation, let's assume that you did react, but what reacted was that girl, not you as a grown up.
Correct.
And my question would be, what would be the effect of healing that healing does when it comes to the age of the person that's responding? Or kind of the maturity, meaning, do you respond as a kid back then? And if you have
Mm,
done some healing, will your response be to you now, where you're like that mature, grown up person that has gone through the healing or have done the self work? Because the situation is the same, but with trigger, you jump back to that kid
right.
or whatever was the age when the trauma or that experience happened or belief was created. But when you have gone through some healing, then you don't jump back there, but you
Right.
have resolved that, and now you can respond from this like healthy space.
Yeah.
What role does healing play in that? Or if you see that it could play, or maybe in your experience, has it played some role in your kind of your age or maturity of that response coming in that moment?
Yeah. If I would have responded without having the awareness and everything, it would have been the little girl responding, and it would have been her yelling and having a tantrum. And you're going to hear me.
Yeah,
That's who would have showed up. That's who was trying to show up,
yeah,
really.
yeah.
It's her. And so the healing, I think part of what happened is nobody else did this. I guess I must have done this to myself, where I kind of went to the inner child, the little Lisa, and said,
Hmm.
it's fine. You're okay. We're okay. We're going to take care of this. Yes, you are hurt, and we're going to go take care of it.
So it wasn't you that got hurt, it was little you.
It was little me. It was
And
little
you were
me.
the one that was able to comfort her in that moment, respond in healthy way instead of
Right.
giving her the steering wheel and she's
Right.
responding.
Yeah, I was taking care of her
Yeah.
instead of letting her take care of the situation, because
Okay.
she was upset. She was like, "Hey, hey, hey, no, I'm really hurt. Listen to me." That's what she was crying out.
How do you distinguish which one is which?
Well, again, it comes with a lot of self-awareness, but it's usually, when you've worked on, like we've worked on ourselves, like we look for peace, we look for, calm, rational, healthy way of managing life and taking care of ourselves. And when she shows up, she comes like screaming. Like it's really obvious when she shows up because it's so different from the way I feel now. Like I'm completely calm now. I'm not triggered. But when the inner child gets triggered, it's not rational. It's chaos. It's her coming, and in my case, it's me coming yelling because I'm not being heard. So I'm gonna make big noise.
Mm. So maybe we can talk a bit more on I can give examples. So like on healing itself, or what are some of the signs that there is some trauma or something to be addressed, or that there has been emotional trauma in the past. Um, like for example, when for the most part, I don't think I have any like really traumatic experiences in my childhood. Um, but then the more I listen to your podcast, and and I think especially at the Fletcher episode, I think it was
Yeah,
episode
yeah.
88. As I was listening through that, I was like, whoa, there's a lot of things that might not be big T trauma, but they're
Right.
small T trauma, or they're related to like neglect or something like that.
Mhm.
Where again, I'm not pointing any fingers, I'm not blaming anybody. It's just
Right.
it's self-worth.
Yep.
And for me, it was I'm just thinking about people listening who might be in a place where they're like, I don't have any trauma. Like I didn't have any like
Yeah.
crazy experiences or and you have literally like a list of traumatic experiences in like there's literally a list, people. Like it's crazy. Um and so you can have that clarity that there's and you were talking about it in other podcasts as well, that you knew that something was wrong or that something
Mhm.
wasn't right. um
Mhm.
but let's say if somebody goes through experience where there wasn't any kind of situations or experiences that stand out as they can qualify as trauma, what are some of the things to look for that might identify there that there are some emotional trauma or some trauma to work through or resolve?
And that's a good question because um, I was thinking of it in a different way of people not realizing that they've had trauma in their life. And I think everybody to a certain degree has had some kind of trauma. It just
Yep.
happens. It's life. But there are people that don't recognize that they have trauma in their life. I had one person who went through the workshop who she was going to support another person that was taking the workshop. And she said, my life wasn't that bad. My parents were alcoholics, but they were fun alcoholics. They were,
Mm,
that's trauma. That's trauma. There's abuse there because even though her parents may have been fun, they can't meet her needs because they're not in a state of being able to meet a child's needs. And so it can be as simple as that. I didn't recognize, I was sharing this the other day, I didn't recognize all the abuse in my life until later on in life. Like I knew my brother, I knew I was being abused by him. And I was aware that my parents didn't protect me the way I needed to be protected. I felt like I wanted to be protected. They didn't stop him. This is what, I
yeah.
mean, that's the bottom line. They didn't stop him. But it wasn't until later on in my adult life that I realized, oh crap, there's a whole bunch of stuff that my mom did, a whole bunch of stuff that my dad did. And, and so I, for me, that was when it wasn't until I realized that I started to be able to see my behaviors.
Mm.
And people who have gone through childhood abuse or even, big T trauma, or a lot of little T trauma, you're somehow it's going to come out because again, abuse and trauma gets stored in your subconscious and it gets stored in your body. So it's going to start showing up. And the only way I can kind of, I guess, explain how it looks to me and how I've experienced it for myself is anything that's way out of balance. So,
Hmm.
like we were just talking about triggers, when you go from a completely calm state to if I went from calm and you said something to me and I started yelling at you, that's, do you see how out of, that's an exaggeration, a bit of an
Yeah.
exaggeration, but it really feels that way. That's the way it feels in the person within you, is you go from calm to like just over the top angry. And so if you're kind of having those kind of things, or you're struggling with relationships, or do you even take care of yourself? That's a big one. People don't even stop to, do you rest or are you constantly pushing yourself? It's those kind of things that it doesn't mean that there was abuse or trauma, but it's still important to take care of those things. So if those things start kind of adding up, it's worth looking into. Again, and it wasn't until I took my workshop that I ended up doing in 2001 that I realized, holy cow, there's more to this than just my brother. Because I had blinders on, I just didn't see it. It was my normal. I thought it was my normal. That's another thing that can be a misconception is
It's really
we realize
blinding.
yeah, well, this is my normal. And then, you go into other people's houses and you're not seeing the same thing in other people's houses. And then you're like, okay, wait a minute.
Mm.
Something's not right.
Okay, so there's few follow-up questions here that I have. So based on what you said, it sounds like even if it's kind of like what are the signs of it? Well, first of all, probably it will be in some ways also different signs.
Yeah.
But what are based on what you said through your experiences, that a lot of the things you understood through observation.
Yeah.
And what would be some of the things that you would suggest to look at or observe in the person, like the person listening, that they can observe in themselves or look at or pay attention to identify if there's anything like out of balance or something that might
Yeah.
not be like as like normal.
One of the things that used to frustrate me, and now I understand why, is other people's reaction to me.
Mm.
I would notice how they would react to me, and I would be like, why are you acting like that? But when I think back on it, there's a reason why they were acting that way, because I was over the top.
Mm.
It's like, why can't you just see it the way I see it? Like, why aren't you seeing it? It's just over the top. So it was kind of, I would react to something. I was probably triggered. I would react to something, and I'd see people kind of like, whoa, get that. And then that would trigger me even more, and that would spin me out even more. And I that was a pattern in my life for a long time, and it was so frustrating because I didn't understand what that was. And now what I understand is I was being triggered. I completely lacked the self-awareness of how I was behaving.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I wasn't crazy and I wasn't abusive to other, but it was not, my reaction did not match what was going on. It was
It wasn't
like,
regulated.
it made people kind of stand back going, whoa, okay, something going on here. And that, when people do that, when you're triggered and someone does that, oh my, that's like the worst thing someone triggered could have, is have someone go, whoa, okay, like chill out, like don't
Oh
tell me
yeah,
to chill
yeah,
out.
yeah.
You're putting some, fuel on that fire.
Or even like kind of reject your feelings or say that like it's
Yeah,
not like it.
yeah.
But at the
I want
same
to be
time, like
heard.
in that moment, your feelings are valid. You do feel angry. You do feel the
Yeah,
way you do. And if somebody says like, well, it's actually not that bad, it's like for you it feels bad. Um,
yeah.
okay, so what I'm hearing is that observing other people's reactions to me, then also behaviors. What are my behaviors? How do I
Mhm.
behave? Is there like specific, I don't know, situations or things to look at when it comes to behaviors?
Well, the self-awareness of paying attention, I think it starts with your thoughts and how your body is
Yeah, that was
reacting.
my third thing, thoughts.
Yeah, yeah, your thoughts, yeah. Um, and what was the question again? This is my
So
mind.
with
Sorry.
the kind of like how you become aware, we got to like you can observe yourself to see if there's like some
Yeah,
trauma or something to be addressed. Others' reaction to me is like the first thing we started, and then it was behaviors, thoughts.
yeah.
Like what to look in those to know that oh there might be some work to be done or something to be addressed.
It's, for me, it was, I just wanted peace, peace. I just wanted to like stop the racing thoughts and get the body calm. And so it really starts with, again, the self-awareness and paying attention to what's going on. And, the thoughts and the body reaction is going to happen as you get triggered. And in the beginning of your healing, you probably be triggered a lot. I was triggered a lot, and I was in survival mode. And so everything is just elevated at that point. And so just working on just starting there and working on getting the thoughts calm down, the body calm down, and finding the modalities that work for you. Breathing techniques are huge. Box breathing, there's a couple other ones, but the box breathing one is definitely super easy to do, and it can get everything calmed down because, like I said earlier, when your breathing is shallow and you're upset, and it's usually shallow and your chest is tight, it's telling your body you're in fight or flight mode. And so we got to get your body back out of that and get your brain realizing that no, 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 we're not in a bad state. Let's calm down. We're not reliving. And so that is really a place to start, because we need to learn how to self-regulate, and
Yeah.
that's empowering, because otherwise you feel completely hopeless. You feel like you have no control over yourself, and being able to do that is empowering, and that opens the door for you to even do more healing.
Okay, so now we're touching on something really interesting, which is control over yourself,
Yeah.
self-regulation. It's something that from kind of situation that you're describing, I would even see that for somebody, something that seems impossible. I
Yeah.
can't control myself. It's impossible.
Yeah.
Um, what would you say would be the starting point to start doing it or start practicing it? Because big part of, I don't even know if it's big part of healing, but it can help when it comes to self-regulation, that you don't respond certain way or you don't give in to
Yeah.
certain triggers. And big part of it is your ability to control yourself,
Yes.
which it can be empowering once you know how to do that. But
Right.
before you're there, it can be really frustrating.
Yep.
And it can also cause a lot of limiting beliefs. Like, if I can't even control myself, what can I control in my life? Kind of thing. Um, so where to
And it
start when
starts
it
even
comes
bigger
to,
than that.
yeah?
It starts bigger than that. Because for me, so much of what the switch for me happened when I had the moment of realizing, truly realizing I have no control over anything else, anybody else, anything else. I only have control over me.
Okay.
And for me, as I've described on my podcast, that angered me when I realized that. Because the thing that we do in survival mode is we are trying to control everything. And it's not because we're trying to be bossy, but it's because it's the way that we feel safe.
Yeah,
But it's
protection
also
mechanism.
impossible. It's completely impossible. You can't control everything else. So that moment that I realized that I had no control over anybody, anything really, I had, it was very frustrating. I got quite angry because I had been juggling those balls for so many years and I was exhausted. But then when I took a moment and thought about it, it was like, this is actually liberating because
Mm.
I don't have to worry about all that other stuff anymore. And so that's why I say it's enough just taking care of this
Mm-hmm.
and managing this. And what it did is it opened up the brain space for me to be able to focus on myself rather than trying to focus on situations and controlling them and managing them, which is impossible. I now had the brain space, and it's not always easy to start working on myself. And it gave me that space to slow down my reactions and pay attention to my behaviors and everything kind of slowed down a little bit so I could start taking it in and start working on it. Because before my complete focus was trying to control everything else. Because again, it wasn't because excuse me, I was trying to be a control freak. It was because that was the only way I felt safe.
So, okay, before we go into self-control, so with this, what would be helpful thing to hear for somebody who is in a situation where they struggle to let go that sense of, or like that attempt to try to control everything?
It's you got to pay attention because that control thing is it hides. It hides in plain sight. And so, the thing that I did is I paid attention to what my motivation was. When I went to do something, what was my motivation? Why was I doing that? That was one of the things that really kind of helped me.
Do you have an example?
Um, oh, um, well, in my old days, I'll bring up an old thing,
Mm-hmm.
old days when I was passive aggressive. And I would do something. That's what made me realize I was passive aggressive is I started paying attention and I forget it was something at work.
Mm-hmm.
And it was not a cool thing that I was going to do. And I realized it because I stopped and I went, why am I doing this? What 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 am I expecting to come out of this? And it hit me just like, oh, this is really not nice. But it was a self-preserving thing that I was trying to do. When I realized the implication that it was going to have on others was when I went, oh, that's really shitty. I can't do that. That's really shitty.
How do you how do you draw a line? Let's say let's say you end up doing that thing, or you might have done other things. How do you
Good.
not well, I want to say perfect, but it's not perfect. But perfect, for example, or question: how do you not see yourself as a bad person? Or how do
Um,
you avoid, let's say somebody has done something where they instantly maybe jump to that thought of, oh, I did that, I must be a bad person.
it's really the most important thing is separating who you are from what you do. And when we haven't begun our healing journey, that gets jumbled, and our identity is our behavior. And so
Mhm.
when we do something wrong, then we're bad. And so much of that comes from our childhood. And so realizing the thing that was so freeing for me was realizing that, and how I could forgive myself too, is realizing that so much of that behavior that I did, there were consequences, and there should be. But I did it because of the pain I was in. I did it as a result of, survival mechanism that I was in coming from my childhood abuse. It doesn't excuse what I did and why, how I did it and the effects that it had on people. And that's some of the cleanup I've had to do over the years. But I can now go, okay, I did that because of this. And as I was putting the workshop together and I was seeing the list of behaviors for all the different things that happen in childhood, and I had almost every single one of them,
Yeah.
it's really easy for me to go, God, that explains so much. And I go into it with curiosity rather than, God, I can't believe I did all that. Oh my God, what a terrible, no, because I tell you, if I hadn't been abused, I probably wouldn't have done most of those things. I'm not doing them now.
So,
Goodness.
how do you? One thing that I also wrote down was about, maybe you can comment a bit on that because I feel like it applies both to trying to control others and controlling yourself, about forward thinking. So in your
Oh,
example
yeah.
that you said that you didn't end up doing whatever you were like thinking to do because you thought about like, oh, what I'm trying to accomplish here, that's forward thinking.
Yeah.
So
It's
do you
critical.
know do you know where it came, like how did you even like ask thought to ask yourself that question? Because that's quite a profound question to come up with.
I think because I felt like, excuse me, I felt like growing up that I wasn't loved and I wasn't appreciated, that I was a bad person for people. And so I didn't want to hurt people. I had this thing about I didn't want to hurt people.
Mhm.
And so I had enough of that and I'd see it. And God, when I would hurt people, when I would do it on purpose or not on purpose, the pain that I would physically go through because of that was just too much. And so I got to the point where I was, but I went hyper the other way to the point where I was detrimental to myself. And, I was way out of balance and I became like a huge people pleaser.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where it started. And it was out of balance. Obviously it was, I had to get it back into balance. And now, um, especially I'm at a point now in my life when I know it's something very important, uh, sensitive or critical or something, where it could be a game changer. I take it really serious. And I don't want to overthink it, but I certainly want to be able to process it enough that I come to an answer that's going to benefit everybody as much as possible.
What's the role of compassion there?
Keeps me from hurting people
And yourself.
and myself. Yeah. Yeah. The compassion, um, it's really a gift. Out of balance, it becomes a problem, right? It can be people pleasing, it can go into a whole different direction. But compassion is what is, I think everybody needs it to a certain degree. Some of us have it more than others, and that's okay. Um, but it's critical in being able to help get messages across, help people. It keeps us from, it can certainly slow down a lot of the hurt that can happen.
Yeah. And also it,
If everything we say or do goes through a filter of compassion to a certain degree, imagine how different the world would be. Mhm.
yeah. And also not only how we treat others, but even like through self-compassion, things that we do don't do to ourselves, or
Right.
even like with overworking or like burnout and things like
Mhm.
that. Being able,
Mhm.
I literally had just had conversation with somebody, um, like she was saying that she got sick or she woke up with like headache or something and she didn't work for like first part of the day and she would beat herself up for it. She's like, oh,
Yeah.
I should be working on my
Yeah.
business. Um, and it's so easy to do that.
Mhm.
And she ended up like doing some work in the evening, which I said to her, like, that's good that you ended up doing it, but it also depends on like where you came from when you did it, because you can come
Right.
from a place where you're like, oh, I haven't done anything, so now I have to
Yeah.
do it, and you kind of like there's so much negative behind it.
Right.
um or it can come from a place of, okay, like because I think there's a balance, especially when you are in your own boss, because that's
Yeah.
your boss can be like one of the harshest critics that you can
Yes.
have. um and also we don't give ourselves like any, literally any compassion. It's just like you have to go, you have
Mhm.
to hustle. um
Yeah.
but taking that step back and being like, okay, like today I don't feel well, I will just allow myself to take a day off, and maybe not necessarily enjoy it if I'm sick or I have headache or
Right.
whatever, but at least,
Don't feel
show my,
guilty.
yeah. But then the other end is like how you find balance between, and I think that's an interesting balance to find, is the balance between compassion and accountability. Because it can go to the end where
Yeah.
to one side when now all the excuses become so strong that you're like, yeah, actually I don't feel like doing it today. So I'm just gonna be
Yeah.
nice to myself. And I see this a lot in wellness space where it's like,
Yes.
I kind of don't feel like doing it today. So
Yeah.
I'm just gonna do whatever I feel like doing, which I am not against that, but I feel like there must be a balance between you do take care of yourself and you have self-compassion, but also a lot of the times, especially when it comes to growth, there's a lot of discomfort there. Even healing,
Yeah.
so much discomfort. Like it
Yes.
doesn't feel good. I hate to say this, but it doesn't feel good.
No.
Um,
Not when you're going through it. Mm-mm.
yeah, not when you go through. When you look back, you might even feel slightly melancholic because you're like, wow, I went through that and I kind of endured and I kind of did it.
Yeah.
And you know that you're the person you are because you went through that.
Mhm.
But at the same time, in the moment, it doesn't feel good. Um, but so getting back to how do you control yourself? How do you regulate yourself? Like where to start? What would be some of your advices with like starting to take some action towards regulating this?
Yeah. Well, and it starts with, again, like the awareness stuff that I was talking about earlier, because that's really what's going to help you see this
Yeah.
stuff,
What helps with
really.
awareness to bring or
Right.
raise
Right.
awareness?
Right. And so, and controlling, God, that's a good, controlling myself. So I guess for me, one of the things I try to do is I try to do the forward thinking. Like when I go to do something, what is the outcome that I want? It sounds manipulative, but it's not. I mean, it
Question:
really,
what to do if you don't know? What is it that you actually want as an outcome? Or you maybe don't have the reference towards a healthy outcome to look towards.
well, even if you don't have a reference, like you don't have the experience yourself of a healthy outcome, there is absolutely nothing wrong. And I've done this in my life of create it. What do you want it to look like? I have literally done that. And that has literally pulled me out of funks. And actually, it has worked where that visual that I was visualizing and it was a big vision came true.
Mm.
So there is absolute, and you don't have to believe it. It's that's not a requirement. And when you first start doing that, that feels super foreign. That feels really weird
Yeah.
and unbelievable, and you'll doubt it. But just create it.
I'm really interested to hear on that piece of you don't have to believe it, because I feel like that's a really powerful statement, because I feel I can draw a lot of parallels with that sense of motivation. Oh, you need to be motivated to do something. It's like, not necessarily. Um, so
No.
and here it's similar, like you don't have to believe it to act on it. How would that look like? Because I feel a lot of times we have this assumption that for me to act on something, I actually have to believe it.
Well, and the thing about the motivation, I want to touch on that, is especially somebody in the beginning of their healing journey or they haven't started it, there is no motivation. You're
Yeah.
exhausted, there is no motivation. So your first steps are going to be really small, and that's okay. That's okay. And so that's why I say you don't have to have motivation. Because if I needed motivation, I wouldn't be where I'm at today. I had to create my own. I just had to take the steps. So there's that. And so the question is now is about,
Um, you don't have to believe to do it.
yeah. And that was a tough one for me because I started out with, oh yeah, that's a bunch of crap, to okay, I'm gonna try it. And the thing is, you're not going to see this stuff right away.
Yep.
It's going to take time. And
Yeah.
so
And
it took
attention.
time for me to finally see that first thing. And then it was like, oh, wow. Okay, I guess this does work. Even though I didn't believe it, it came true. And here's an example. And I used this story in my podcast before. So a couple summers ago, my husband had a really scary health scare, really, really scary. And boy, I want to talk about triggered all over the place. I got triggered big time. And one of the times I was home with the dogs and he was at the hospital, and I just went into the spiral of thinking the worst. Like literally my mind went to the absolute worst. And I was aware of how my body was reacting to it. Oh my God, I was barely breathing. My chest was tight, my neck, my back, everything was tight. I was hurting. I talk about, I want to climb out of my own skin and get away from myself. That was one of the nights because I could not stand the way I felt. It was so not common to me
What
anymore.
was it that you felt? Like what was the feeling?
It was overwhelming fear,
Okay. Was
overwhelming
it like
fear.
even like being, what is the word? Terror?
Oh, terrorized.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah. So it physically, like everything was tight. Like my neck was tight, my back was tight, my chest was tight. I wasn't breathing real well. I was getting a headache. My mouth was dry. My stomach was a mess. I could barely drink water, forget eating. So I had myself completely jacked up. And I realized I, for the first time, need to get myself out of the situation because that is the way I kind of lived my life back in the unhealthy days.
Intense.
That is how I lived. Like when something would go wrong, that's how my life
And
was.
we were just talking about it before, how in your pictures you looked more, you literally look tight, like you were uptight
Yeah,
all the time.
all the time. And so imagine being uptight all the time and then something happened and something like this happens. It's like it completely consumed me. And I knew like this is like I knew in my head what was going on and I knew I needed to change it. And so one of the first things I did is I literally have got a really good meditation app. And I thought, I'm going to make myself meditate for 5 minutes, just a short amount of time. And it was hard. It was really hard. It was hard for me to get focused, but it took enough of the edge off that the next thing I realized I needed to do was I needed to stop these crazy, negative, frightening thoughts that I was having. And what I did is I had the ability to start visualizing what I wanted it to look like.
Hmm.
And it was tough because my mind was fighting me.
And body.
Oh yeah, yeah. I had got myself down, calmed down just a little bit, just a little bit. So I started thinking about what I wanted this to look like. And I felt myself calming down more. So then I did a 20-minute meditation. So I took a break from the thoughts. I thought, okay, I got myself down, calmed down a little more. So I did a 20-minute meditation. And by the time I came out of that meditation, I was able to jump right into exactly the way I wanted things to look. And my mind like went on and it was awesome. And it was my husband was going to be healthy. Not only was he going to be healthy, he was going to be able to come back and bounce back and all this stuff. And literally to this day, that vision I had that night, he's living it.
Hmm.
I'm not saying I had anything to do with it,
Yeah.
right? I definitely put that out there in the universe, right? Because I was saying it. I wasn't just thinking it. I was literally saying it. There's power in words. There's power in words. And so that's a really big example of what I'm saying. Yeah.
I had also a question on that body tightness. No, actually,
Yeah.
before this, with that, I'm thinking if I have anything to add with that, you don't need to believe it.
Oh, yeah.
Because I feel like Iron Man, that's a
Yeah,
good
right. That's a
example.
good example for you. Yeah,
It
for
wasn't
sure.
even that I believed or not, I knew. Like when I was when I was when I signed up for it, like 90 days before it, I knew that physically I'm not in a place where I can finish it because I was barely finishing half marathon. And but I didn't have to believe in it to take action on it.
Right, right,
And
right.
and still to the day of the race, and it's something like when I was making that first clip of like 90 days I want to train for it. I literally was like, do I think I can do it? I don't know. Like I literally I don't know. But in my mind, there was a time before where I would so care about it, whether I can or can't, especially the can't.
It made your decision for you. If you felt like you can't, then you're not going to do it. If you feel like you can,
And
then
it
you'll do it.
also was about what others would think.
Oh yeah.
If I now publicly track my or like kind of document my journey, then I go to the race day and I fail. Like that would be I would just disappear. You won't see
Yeah.
me. But for me it was interesting to go through that because again, getting back to curiosity, for me
Yeah.
it was interesting to see if I actually can do it. That would be my kind of point of reference of what can I actually get done in 90 days. Which I actually today on a walk, I was thinking I still don't think I have registered that I did it. I don't think it
Yeah.
still has clicked. Like that
Yeah.
I did it in
You know, you
like
have all the evidence.
I have the medal, but
Right?
still, it's and that's where even better when it comes to beliefs. I still don't believe.
Right?
Even though I have reference, it hasn't clicked to the level where I'm like, yeah, I really believe that I have proof. So now I can't really say I don't believe because it
Right.
did happen. So it's not about whether I believe it can or can't happen because it just did happen.
Right.
But the whole process, it wasn't also of me putting that limiting or those limits on I think I can do it or can't. I was like, I don't know because I haven't done it. And I feel that's where a lot of times we jump to those conclusions of trying to assume maybe too soon or put those limits on us too soon of I think I can't do it or I think I can do it. But it's like based on what? If you now say you can't, it's like that saying, if you say you can't, you won't, or if you say you can, like you're in both ways you're true. Um,
Right. When
and I
you think you
think
can or you can't, you're right.
exactly. Thank you. And that's what is interesting because I still took action despite what I believed or didn't believe. Because at that point I had no point of reference to know whether it's possible or not. And I was doing it also without like a coach or guidance or anything. I bought my swimsuit like a week before the race.
I think a lot of that is because you honestly went into it with curiosity instead of judgment. Where before you were judging yourself, right? You were just, oh, I can't even consider that. And instead you went, I don't know. I have no idea, but we're going to find out.
Yeah,
And
and
I
I
think
think
that's
it's
healthy.
yeah, that one is definitely much more healthy. And I think it wasn't even judgment, it was instantly conclusion. Can't do it. I didn't even consider it because I was like, it's impossible for me. Like I can't do it.
Mhm.
Um, and and that's where also like even with those things that seem impossible, like question them, challenge them. Is it really impossible? Did you try it once and failed? And does that mean that it's impossible for you? Or it was just your first attempt?
I know when you come to a conclusion, it's just that's your answer. You
Yep.
haven't gone through the process of, wait a minute, why? Why do I think that? Why do I think that I can't?
Mm.
What what's going on, because seriously, you bypass all that, you just come to that conclusion.
Yeah.
It's
And
final.
that's where a lot of times I think it's really similar with confidence. A lot of times we wait to feel confident to do something before we do it. Maybe even
Doing
like you
it
doing
builds
your
the confidence.
podcast. You doing your podcast also could be an example. Did you feel confident to do it day one?
No, I had no idea what I was doing.
How confident are you now?
Much more confident.
Okay, so what played a
Much.
role in your confidence?
Doing it,
See,
just doing
but
it, and being, and with the understanding, I'm going to do it and I'm going to mess up.
yep,
Oh, because I've never done this before. I don't know
yep,
how to do this, so I'm going to make mistakes, and that's what
yeah.
it's about.
And it's I think we were talking about this in the podcast that we did together on I think success and failure. But I think it would be viable to bring it up here as well. Because I think I asked in that episode about what was it? Why is it that we pay so much attention to failure? Like, why is it such a big
I
focus? Why
know.
is it such a big deal? Because I think a lot of times you see all these like hero stories. They overcome and they fail. They fail again. They fail again. They fail again, and then they like take off or they succeed. We connect with that. That's what we
Yeah.
connect. But at the same time, something that we actually connect over, we're afraid of.
I think we make the failure part of our identity. I think that's what we do. I think we make it so much a part of us. And I think that's why I say the separating the behavior from our identity is so critical. And that's why all of a sudden we don't take it so personal. We don't take it so, you know, I messed up instead of I'm a failure.
Yeah.
And I think we're just really starting to learn about failure, that failure, like really starting to understand that failure is important, and it's not a bad thing. Like I was raised that failure is a bad thing. You do
Yeah, same.
everything to avoid any kind of failure.
So
So what did
ironic.
you do? You didn't do anything.
Yeah. You literally can't do anything.
No, because you're gonna fail.
Yeah.
You're
And
gonna fail
I
at
know
something.
it was so true for me. And that's why, like, for me, this was actually a big kind of full circle moment, signing up for something that I don't know if I can succeed or not at, because I was, my background was more so like, if there's any chance or if I see any possibility of me failing, I will not do it.
Oh
Or
yeah,
not
me
winning,
too.
I will not do it.
And you'll always find you and when you're looking, you will always find a way that you're gonna fail, so you can't do
Yep.
it.
And imagine how much growth I missed out on
I know.
because that's the ironic thing that a lot of growth actually happens through that failure.
Exactly. If you look at it, see, that's the thing. There's
Yeah,
two ways to look at
perspective.
failure. You can look at it like I failed, I'm a screw up, I'm a mess up, all that, right? Or you can look at it like, okay, that didn't work. So what can I take out of that does work? What can I change? And then do it different.
Yeah.
See, there's a big difference between, you see, the first one is it's
Yep.
part of your identity, it's part of who you are.
And it's negative. Or it's not as maybe open-minded.
It's not. You're not even open to learning if you do that because you're so busy beating yourself up.
Oh
You're
my
not
gosh.
even open
Yeah.
to learning anything other than, oh, I'm just a screw up. Here I go
Yeah.
again, screwed up again. That whole language.
There's another topic that I wanted to touch on, which is and I feel it's really, especially for like I feel like my generation, it's like a big challenge, which is connection.
Mhm.
Um or and I was talking to my friend about it. Well, safe space and connection, because I feel that
Yeah.
I see this so much, like we're good at texting, but when it comes to social skills, when it comes to social interactions, when it comes to um even like relationships, there's a lot of blocks, a lot of lack of skill. And it's I also see the big part of it is growing up where if something's broken, you go buy a new one. Or
Right.
you don't have to, like, we literally have no patience, because if you want to go watch something, you go watch, like you literally you don't even have to leave your sofa. Whereas before, if you would go, you have to be like, oh, what's on today? Or like if you order something, you would wait for weeks instead of hours or maybe a day. So like even like with the patients
Yeah.
and like I feel like connection is something that I see missing so much. And it's so I feel that and I was listening to interview with one the bodybuilder who won the Mr. Olympia. And he was
Mm,
talking about how for him the relationship was so important that he was like, if I would start to see that it's starting to affect my relationship, I would step back from like what I'm doing because it's that important for me.
mm.
And he said it's really important to not to neglect your relationships as you're climbing the mountain, because then by the time you're
Oh
at the
yeah.
top of the mountain, you're alone and you have nobody
Yes.
to share with. And even that experience of sharing, it's so powerful.
Hmm.
Um, and it enhances the whole experience. And
Hmm.
even like if I think about my Ironman, my
I was gonna
friend,
say, yeah,
my brother
your
and his
family was
girlfriend,
there,
they made it so fun. Like,
right?
I don't think I would enjoy, like, there was a lot of pain, don't get me wrong, a lot of pain, but I probably wouldn't get as much enjoyment out of it as I did with stuff that they were doing with their
Yeah,
like the signs that they were
supporting
writing up.
you. They were there for you. It's so cool.
Yeah, and even it's just and it's not even just the race day. It's before the race day. It's
Yeah,
after the race day. Then
yeah,
going back home and showing my medal to
yeah.
everybody um and like my grandma, she was like, "No, we have to call you like Iron Lady," and even like those small experiences, or even like in the first half marathon, like I had my brother and his girlfriend. They made me this
Oh, that's right. I
as
remember. It's so
yeah
cute.
because I said them that I'm afraid that I won't finish it on time because if you don't finish in by the deadline, you don't get the medal. That's what I read in the rules. And I was afraid that I won't finish it because the week before, 1 week before, I finished 24 minutes past the deadline. So I was like, you can't cut off like 24 minutes in a week. Um,
Yeah.
apparently you can. But but I was like, as I was, and I didn't even expect them to be there. And as I was like running in the finish line, they also like filmed me finishing, and then they had this medal that they gave to me. So I had two medals instead of one, and I finished second to last. So all of this to say that it's really powerful to have connection, to have support, to have that
Yes.
like even like that safe space. So I well, one thing would be your perspective on the importance of it, but also like how to what helps to create it, what helps to build it when it comes to that connection or that safe space, or what are some of the like requirements for that?
Well, yeah, connection is really important. We're not supposed to be alone. We're supposed to live in tribes or communities, and that's how we're supposed to be. And so, connection is critical. And we can go on about the studies that have been done with babies and having connection with them and their development. And so there's, we need that. And how to build it. Because I was sitting here thinking, like, how do I build mine? Like, I don't have a huge group of people around me, a very small group of people. These people, though, are like-minded. That's one of the things. They're
Okay.
like-minded. They're not, none of them are perfect. I'm not
Yeah.
perfect. That's not what I'm looking for at all. But they're like-minded in
I
the
think if
same
they
way.
appear perfect, then they probably are not opening up to you
Oh,
enough.
yeah. If they're coming across as perfect, you need to kind of take a step back. You got to be careful. But they have the same values and goals and standards in life, and like that's how you connect. That's how you connect is through that. Like I'm trying to think of, I can't connect with an alcoholic, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of obvious, right? So I don't have alcoholics in my part of my community.
Yeah.
So, and really, in order to be able to really connect with others, it goes back to being able to connect with yourself first. It always starts with you. I mean, you are your foundation, and everything else goes out from there. So, whatever is going on within you, if you're connecting with yourself, if you're taking care of yourself, if you've got self compassion and self care, that's going to go out. If you have a good relationship with yourself, that's going to go out. So it really starts within you. And when you maybe start your healing journey, it's gonna feel, and you're probably even gonna hear from people you're being really selfish because you need to focus on you. Because the thing is, you haven't been.
Yep.
You haven't been. You've been focused on everything else. You may have been in survival mode, but you haven't been taking care of yourself. And so that's really where it ultimately starts. And from there, it goes out and it gets much, much, much easier.
Yeah, I think, and I wrote down that like to connect with yourself, you need to know yourself and understand
Exactly.
yourself. And I
Exactly.
also would even add when it comes to even like finding the people that do align with you, it's really hard to find it if you don't know who you
Right.
are.
Exactly. Exactly. That's so true. And that was the crisis that I hit in 2016 when I had no idea who I was, what I liked. I had been spending my life being a chameleon and changing myself to everybody I would try to figure out what you expected of me, how you expected me to behave, and that's how I would try to behave. I'm sure a lot of times I was wrong. This is all going on in my head.
What helped you to actually go on that discovering yourself journey instead of literally starting to go down that rabbit hole of darkness, really?
Well, my husband helped me a lot with that. But it was kind of a weird time when it actually happened, was when my son got married. It was like literally the day after he got married, and I love his wife and I was so happy for him. So I didn't go into this
Yeah.
unhappy at all. But it was the next day, and I just, after we opened presents and had a good time and a nice brunch, and I went home and walked into the house and it just hit me. And I was dating him then, but my husband called me. He knew something was up. And he had kind of gone through the same thing. And what it hit me is like I didn't know who I was. Like I wasn't the same mom anymore. I wasn't a wife. I just like I have no idea. What do I do with myself? I have no idea.
And I think that's a challenge when we attach our identity to something that we do,
Right.
or whether
Right.
it's being a wife, being a mom, or career that you
Right.
have, where once that is taken away, it's like, who am I?
Exactly. And I think that's what happened is I was still a mom. It was
Yeah, yeah,
different, you
yeah.
know. He didn't need me in the same way that he did before. And I loved being a mom. I loved it. And so I knew it wasn't taken away from me. It was like, oh, I'm not a mom
Yeah,
anymore.
yeah.
But it was like, what am I? Like
Hmm.
I didn't even realize at the
Maybe
time how much.
that what happened was that the role is still there, but your attention on that role is so much less. It's not occupying you as much
Right.
because now like he's
Yeah.
living his life with his family, so he needs his mom less. So then
Right.
you have much more space of okay, so I'm like what now?
Right. Right. Exactly. Exactly. And yeah, it was really humbling, but it's been a real journey, like finding out I love history and like
How did
I didn't
you
think I liked history because in school I didn't do well. Well, I didn't do well in school for a lot of other reasons.
yeah, but how did you start? Like how do you start that journey where one, there's so many directions to go to, so many things to do, but also I think partly also because and I see this a lot because we live in ultra hustle
Yeah.
environment right now where it's like, oh, if it doesn't make sense, it's if it's not towards like your career or like business or whatever, you shouldn't be doing it. Or that seemingly is the thinking that a lot of times we have where it's like, why would you now go and like learn history? Like, are you
Right.
becoming like, is that the job that you're gonna do? Like, I
Right.
literally feel
What
like
value
that's
is in that?
I literally feel like that's a lot of times where we go. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, if it's not adding value, then I shouldn't be doing it.
Right.
So how do you start? How did you start? How did you find yourself? I feel like you probably similar. I don't believe you ever fully found yourself because there's so much to explore. But even
Yeah.
like to get on that journey, like what was the process there?
Well, Yeah, what was the first step? Because after Larry said, well, let's find out who she is. Let's find out who Lisa is. I think one of the things that helped was I had very black and white thinking.
Mm,
And I had a coach say to me one time, it was the only smart thing that he really said was, you always look at things in black and white. Why don't you start looking at things in color? And
yeah.
that hit me. I didn't understand it completely, but it hit me and I knew there was something to that. And so, the first thing I recognized that I had to switch up is I'm not in survival mode anymore. I don't have to keep putting out fires. Like I'm not living that life. That's how I was looking at life as, oh, where's the next fire? Oh, where is it? I don't have to be putting fires out. So what is it I like? And I literally started experimenting. I went dancing. I love dancing. I tried different kind of dancing. I just started with things that right away I kind of knew,
Okay.
like, oh, those things like, oh, I always wanted a da 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 da
Mm-hmm,
da.
mm-hmm.
Right. So I started with kind of some of those. And some of them I found out, nah, it was better as a fantasy in my head than actually doing it. Um, and then what that does though, when you start being curious and allowing yourself to have a more open mind, this stuff starts coming to you.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And it also starts to feel natural. Like for example, for me with the
Yeah.
Ironman, does it make sense? Not really. Like it's it's like there's no logic behind it. It's a
Right.
lot of training. So a lot of time you spend literally just cycling or running or
Yeah.
swimming. And it's an expensive sport as well.
Yeah.
And
It's an investment for sure. And there's a lot of growth.
oh yeah, it's and
Ton.
that probably is that why where do I see
Mhm.
career in triathlon? No, like not really. Even like when I had a conversation with a friend of mine about doing the full one, and he has done it. He was like, oh yeah, the full one is way different, and it's like serious work. And I literally I was like, oh, I have no idea what's ahead of me. um because with this one, like, because I'm still not registering fully what I did, it's now if I think about doing double
Yeah.
thing, and also like now going through like with even like with basketball training at like injured ankle, so I have to deal with that. And then probably like the bigger is the training load, the more injuries can start to
Mhm.
like show up. And but a
Yep.
lot of it is all the stuff, even like the cold plunges and all that. It's for me, those are tools for self-exploration. Even like with the
Yeah.
Ironman, it wasn't just a sport. It's like, how do I
Yeah.
navigate something that I have never done before? So now imagine, and anybody can relate to something that they have always wanted to do, but they always had this thought of, oh, I'm not ready yet, I don't have enough time,
Yep.
or it's too late, I'm too old, all
Yep.
the stories that we might have, we all have something like that. But what we end up doing is we allow that story to hold us back.
Yeah.
And
That
for
belief.
me, it was more so I'm curious, what will I learn through this challenge or through this experience? And the focus was less on succeeding at it. Well, I don't want to say that because I did focus on that. But I think whether I would succeed or not, and I was thinking about it literally, I think the day before. I was like, if I don't finish it for whatever reason, do I think it will matter that much?
I was going to say, it's not a failure. It's not a failure.
At
If
no,
you're going
yeah,
into it with curiosity like that and open-mindedness, it's not, you wouldn't fail, even if you didn't finish it, it's not a failure.
yep,
It's not.
yeah. And that was the interesting piece because before I would see not finishing as a failure. But when I was sitting and thinking about it, I was like, and I got a bit worried when I had a call with one of my clients that said like week before the race. He's like, have you tried the transitions? I'm like, no. He's like, do you know what you're doing with your nutrition? No. And that's
Oh
when I was like,
God.
so
Yeah. Triggered.
and I was like, oh my gosh, I can't do this. I have and
Oh
but what
God.
happened was literally straight after that, I was like proper like, oh my gosh, like what will I do? I have week. And in the last week, you can't really train intense. And I was like, oh my, I started YouTubing like how do you do transitions? And I started to take some notes. But then at one point, I could feel how I'm like getting in that place of like starting to overthink. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna take a, and I don't know where that idea came from. I started to look at my progress pictures 90 days ago and
Oh,
today, because my weight hasn't changed that much. But when I looked at the pictures, I instantly was, all those thoughts completely disappeared. I'm like, I'm succeeding here.
oh, nice.
I'm already succeeding because I was like,
Yeah,
whoa. I couldn't recognize the difference. I thought like, yeah, I'm having some progress, or some people would like comment on it, and I'm like, yeah, because I wouldn't see that on weights, like, and I don't see the
right,
change day to day in myself, and I didn't
right.
compare the two. And when I looked at them and I thought of like, there's 3 month difference between the two pictures. I
Yeah,
was
it's
like,
significant. It was significant. I remember that.
I was like, okay, I probably can figure this out. If I can't, I will deal with it. But that's where that's where that kind of, it's also through those experiences, that's where I feel you can start to shift how you see success, how you define
Yeah.
it. Because I was like, I'm
Yes.
already succeeding. I went
Right.
through so much growth in
Right.
those 83 days when I
Yep.
was at that point, 1 week out.
Yep.
And still within a week, things that I managed to do. I did my first outdoor swim. Um, I learned, or I tried at least once, first transition, second transition, or no, second transition. First, I hadn't even done once, and my legs were jelly after swimming for the first 30 kilometers, which is almost 1/3 of the distance. And I thought I
Mm.
won't be able to finish it. And now imagine how much growth happened in that moment when the whole time I'm like, can I do it? Can I do it? My legs are
Yeah.
jelly. Can I do it? Like, I barely am cycling right now. And I literally feel like I have never felt that much fatigue in my legs. And I
Yeah.
was like, okay, I understand where he was coming from when he asked me about transitions. um, and so that's where like all of those things, which another point to that is how much more prepared I am for the next race now that I have actually gone through that and made all those mistakes.
Hmm. Yep. Yeah.
The mistakes that I
Again,
couldn't
not
predict.
failure. Again, not that you learned. You're like, oh, okay, this worked and this worked. This didn't work. And next time I'll do it like this. I mean, that's not failure.
And I'm thinking if maybe you can also comment on your perspective on this or your experience. I feel like the more I evolve or the more I go through these experiences, the more that definition of failure or even failure as a concept as I had it before starts to dissolve, where
Yeah,
it doesn't really matter as much.
it doesn't. And, and I can relate to that because it wasn't even that many years ago that I would have never done the podcast. Are you kidding me? I have no idea what I'm doing. I have no experience in that, right? Never been on a podcast, had never thought about it. There's that. And so I didn't know what I was doing. And I would be putting that out to the public and I would be showing my mistakes. I would be
And you're
showing
also
my.
sharing really personal stories.
Well, that's the other thing too, because there's so many times that I share stories that I have never shared with anybody. And I remember when the stories, like it's so funny, I'm sitting there on the podcast and a story will come up and this thought goes through my head of, oh God, nobody knows about that one.
Don't.
Oh, God, I'm never going to share that one. Well, guess what? That is the exact thought that goes through is like, I've never shared that with anybody. I was never going to share that with anybody. Here we go. And and the difference, like back then there was just so much shame, and it was my identity. It absolutely was locked into my identity that if I tell that story, then everybody thinks I'm just nothing but a screw up. And now it's like understanding that, when I tell these stories, and usually it's because I'm pointing out a behavior or something that happened and coming up with a resolution, but it's separating that behavior from who I am. And so I can spend the time forgiving myself and understanding that, and going forward I won't do that behavior. And if I make another mistake, it's not me being a screw up. Does that make sense? i
Yeah,
still I still struggle with that because I can still, if I am not making myself present, I will automatically, my
yep.
default is to go beat myself up.
I think what's been helping me um, was kind of to reframe the way I would look at it, where there was I don't remember where I heard it, but there was like one guy, it was either audiobook or something, where he said that if I don't have the result that I want, it just means two things. Either I don't know the right thing to do or I haven't done it long enough.
Mm,
So it doesn't mean anything
yeah,
about me. I just haven't found the right thing to get that specific result right now with where I am right at this point with all that I know or people that I know. Um, so all it means is that I either don't have, or either I don't know something, or I don't have the certain skill built up to enough good enough level to get to that result. But it doesn't
right,
mean anything about me. It's just a lot of times, big part of that equation is time and action, consistent action. And that's where like a lot of times I remind myself that I'm like, okay, so instead of now thinking I'm a failure, I can't do this, I'm like, what is it that I could learn? What is it that I could look for? Is
right,
there anybody that I can reach out to?
right.
And
Why
through
wasn't I able to do that? What kept me from doing that? I had a counselor say to me one time when my former husband and I were in counseling, and it was so profound. So my husband was running his own business. He had never had experience and he hadn't gone to college. Nobody ever taught him, right? And he was struggling with it. It was hard. And the counselor said to him, because the expectation he had was that he should know this stuff,
mm,
right? That's kind of the mindset that he
yep.
had. And the counselor said to him, well, did you go to school to get a business degree? No. Has anybody mentored you on this? No. Has anybody sat down and taught you this? No. Why are you expecting that you'll know that? And I remember, like, I literally sat back going, wow, that's profound. And it's true. And that's so much of what is in that whole mindset of perfectionism and stuff of, well, I need to know that. I should know that. I should know that. I should know that. And God, we should know ourselves to paralysis. And that's what we do.
And I think it's finding that balance or maybe that acceptance that you actually might never fully know yourself because there's so many layers,
Yeah.
so much depth to you
Yeah.
to get to know you. And that's okay. That's actually what keeps it interesting.
Right.
Because like every year I learn something new about myself.
Yep. We're
And
supposed to
it's a
expand,
yeah.
not contract.
And okay, so on that note, I have the last question for you. Um,
Okay.
what is the impossible that you're chasing right now?
Hmm. What is the impossible I'm chasing now? The workshop. I kind of have mixed feelings about it because there's a bigger part of me that feels like, yeah, this is gonna go. Like I don't have a question about it. But then I think, dang, am I really gonna be able to do this?
How do you battle that? Because I feel like this is a good example, not battle, that's not the right word, but kind of how do you manage it? Because this is a good example of kind of belief and do it anyway.
Yeah, it totally is. And that's exactly what I do. I'm like, you know what? I feel inside of me like this is going to be super helpful and it's going to be big. And it's not because, oh, I'm wonderful.
Yeah.
It's going to make a difference in women's lives. And that's what motivates me. And I feel like, and I've got these expectations. And then I stop and I go, you know what? If the first workshop we only have a few women, I'm okay with that. That's it. Let's say we just have three women. That's three women that's
That's
gonna
three
get.
lives. And not only them, their families and
Yeah, because that's exactly what happens when those women go through it. It trickles out into their family. So that doesn't matter. Like it may not start big. That's okay. As long as it starts making a difference, and that's what motivates me, and that's what pushes me. And it's not a failure if I only have three people in the first workshop. No, it's not a failure. That means I've got three women I'm helping.
yeah, and I think this again ties into that how we define success,
Right.
because I think I had somebody who Or it might have been me. I think it might have been both. But I remember like I did one workshop and I think I had the only two people show up to that workshop. And or I remember it was like for somebody else, they had only a few people show up. And then when it happened to me, I kind of reframed it and I used what I said to them because I was like, how lucky are they? They can get so much deeper support.
Right,
And I just focus on delivering as much value to them and they can ask
right,
me questions. There's no managing to do who can ask, what can ask, or like no questions
right.
because I have to deliver or whatever. I actually could have really kind of intimate like delivery with them where they probably got way more value. They probably had even like personal coaching from me just by attending
Exactly.
that workshop where I was like, that's a win because probably
Yep,
those two people had bigger impact than I would have if I had 50 people show up.
exactly.
Um, and
Exactly.
that's where again it's kind of that reframe of what is success? More people, does
Right.
it actually mean more success? You know, um,
That's
so
another reason why forward thinking is so important,
yeah,
because the forward thinking helps you plan now and prepare now.
yeah. And it's another perspective there that I had was if I fail, only two people saw.
And then there's that.
Yeah,
And then there's that.
I can handle that, you know. So
And
there's
then there's that.
we can always find good and bad in each situation, but it's
Right.
for me it's really interesting. And also the more I explore myself and go through certain experiences, that the more I also see like, oh, like I think that this is not good enough or whatever. And I'm like, says who? Like, you
Yes.
know, it's
Yes.
and all this like,
Why is
or
that coming up? Shut up.
yeah, or I can't do this, or this is too much. Says who? Like,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
that's we always want to like challenge that or question
Yes.
that. But thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me on again. We always have amazing
Yeah,
conversations,
the
whether
best
the recording's
conversations.
on or not.
Yeah, it's always so interesting and so insightful. I feel like every time
Yeah,
we have conversation, I learn something new, and I really
me
hope
too.
our listeners. I not only hope, I know that they had there's
They get
this
benefit.
this episode was packed. I probably
Yeah,
want
well,
to go through myself and take some notes.
I know, right?
All right, all right. Thank you again, and
Thank you.
all of you. We will see you in the next episode.
Yes.